And Dr. Dinesh Singh is with us, Chancellor of KR Mangalam University. Welcome, sir, to the India Today Education Conclave. Can we have a big round of applause, please, for Dr. Dinesh Singh? Ladies and gentlemen, can we please settle down so we can start our next session? Thank you very much. Dr. Dinesh Singh, welcome to the India Today Education Conclave, sir. It was a pleasure to host you last time as well. The topic is something that we've all discussed in great detail. I'm sure many people here have also had, fireside chats about this, about how and why is it that India is not considered to be a go-to hub for education. To you, sir, if you had to list 3 reasons for that, what would they be?
Well, I had no idea you're going to ask the toughest question right at the beginning, so I have no immediate magic formula, but certainly if you were to ask me, I would best learn from those that we regard as globally ranked institutions and see what makes them stand out. And if you do that, then the answers become clearer. So everybody talks about Harvard, okay? No one would probably dispute that. It's one of the top ranked institutions. But if you look at Harvard, for more than 100 years, Harvard was nothing. Things changed for Harvard when you examine its history, when the local government, the government of the state of Massachusetts, let go of the control of Harvard. And the alumni took over. That's when Harvard started becoming Harvard. So that's one of the first learnings, that if you have too much control, too many regulations, a bit of sort of something that crowds you, makes it claustrophobic, and that's been happening in India, not just in the last few years, it's been happening for a long time. If you look at the early years, and particularly during British times, and I'll give you an example that'll tell you how things have changed. So, when Ramanujan was trying to get his intermediate degree at Chennai, Madras then, Madras University kept failing him because he could not clear the English examination. That's the 12th grade, okay? Intermediate is the 12th grade. It's not even a proper university degree. Everybody understood there's something special, but they wouldn't give him anything. Eventually, he lost his scholarship. By then, Cambridge University had understood that this man is extraordinary. So they called him over to Cambridge, asked no questions, didn't ask if he had a school or a college degree or a master's, gave him a proper, regular PhD degree, straight. That was more than 100 years ago. Now you ask yourself, in those intervening 100-odd years, if Ramanujan were to come again to my own university where I was the Vice Chancellor, I'm a mathematician, and for me he is a god, let alone giving him a regular PhD, not an honorary doctorate, a regular PhD, I wouldn't be able to admit him into my undergraduate program. I wouldn't, because he wouldn't be able to clear the exams, and the Vice Chancellor has no power to do that. Now that's what makes Cambridge stand out. That's one reason. That's what makes Harvard stand out, that it's controlled by itself. It enjoys a great deal of autonomy. It enjoys freedom to do what it chooses to do within certain bounds, but fairly free things. In our institutions, in spite of an extraordinary policy that the minister spoke about, the national education policy, and if you ask me if I were to describe the national education policy in one word, I would say that's freedom. It grants you enormous freedom to create. In spite of that, we're being bombarded by all kinds of regulations. Let me give you one other reason. Harvard really began to take off when in the early part of the last century, a little before that, Albert Lowell became the president. And he was president for 23 years, if I'm not mistaken. So he stayed for a long time. And he had this vision, which he could then implement because he was given freedom and he was given time. Most state universities run by state governments give a vice chancellor a 3-year term in India. By the time, and you can appoint the best person, if he joins that institution, it takes him several months just to figure out what's going on. By the time he gets going, it's time for him to leave. And there's hardly any continuity of vision. That's another reason. Then the thing that makes Cambridge, Harvard, Stanford stand out, they are connected to the needs and challenges of the society and the world around them. Let me give you an example. So in 2012, there was this deep study which looked at the geographical region around Stanford University. Just the local region around Stanford, where there were lots of companies, startups, all directly owing their existence to ideas that were coming from Stanford. And you know what was their total economic strength in 2012? $3 trillion. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Stanford University is driving the economy of the region around it. In 2012, it was up to $3 trillion. Imperial College, where I studied and which is ranked consistently amongst the top 7-8 institutions in the world, the same year that Stanford was running an economy of $3 trillion, Imperial College had contributed 56 billion pounds to the economy of Great Britain. Now you ask, why does that happen? Because when I was a student at Imperial, I remember the first pilot plant for interferon in the world was set up there. That's something that was needed badly. The Concorde was designed at Imperial College. And these are ideas coming from the knowledge world and are being put into action. In other words, knowledge in action, something that our institutions have been lacking for a long time. And I'm happy that the minister is also in charge of skills, because all these institutions understand that skills and knowledge are just two sides of the same coin. You cannot segregate the two. I'll give you an example. If you look at the IT firm Google, some years ago, I looked at its quarter earnings, 1 quarter, 3 months. And I looked at the Indian top IT companies, all of them. I'm not going to name them. I looked at the top 5 for the same quarter. At that point in time, Google had around 10,000 employees, had been about 10 years old. These IT companies had been around for long numbers of years, had several 100,000 employees, and their entire revenue, all of them combined for that quarter, was less than a quarter of what Google was making in 1 quarter. Why? Because Google was putting knowledge into action. Google runs on an undergraduate idea that comes from Stanford University, an undergraduate mathematics idea. It's not difficult to unravel. I have looked at it. I've taken apart their search engine. And it requires good coding. And that's what made Google what it is. Now you ask, which one of these IT companies are putting any kind of knowledge into play? That's another reason. Our educational institutions, the national education policy gives us a chance. It tells us, by the way, the policy prescribes wonderful things, but believe you me, almost all of them could have been done without the policy. It's just that nobody was doing it. And so you have to put it in a policy and tell people do it. That's something that, it talks about putting good university presidents in place. Let me tell you, Princeton University became Princeton when in the 60s, there was an assistant professor from the social sciences, Robert Goheen. He was 37 years of age. Assistant professor, 37 years of age. The board of trustees of Princeton made him president straight away, because they saw something special in him. And he was there for 19 years as president of Princeton University, and Princeton became Princeton because of that. Baroda University had the first woman vice chancellor in the world in 1949, Hansa Mehta. She had no master's, let alone a PhD, had never been in a university, never taught. Sardar Patel made her the founding vice chancellor, the first woman vice chancellor in the world. And she was there for 9 years. So look, and she made Baroda University an extraordinary university. You know, Venkat Ramakrishnan, the Nobel laureate, he took his first degree in the life sciences from Baroda University. And he said that when he studied life sciences, he also got a great grounding in mathematics at that university, and his work is all mathematical. And he says, that helped me do the Nobel Prize winning work. Today's time, you will not be able to appoint Hansa Mehta as vice chancellor. UGC regulations require you have to be a professor for 10 years. You have to have a PhD. The people that I've admired, Maurice Guire was the vice chancellor of Delhi University. He was there for 12 years. He didn't have a master's, he didn't have a PhD, he had nothing like that. And he made Delhi University what it is today. He was the one who transformed the university. You see that today's time, Maurice Guire won't be able to make it.
So are you saying then that we're going back in time, instead of loosening up, we're getting more rigid? Or is this, do you think it's an impact of politics?
No, not really. There's no politics. In fact, the political class, the government of the day, must be commended. I have no political axe to grind. I think they've done a marvelous job by giving us the national education policy. We need to embrace it in the right spirit. And there, regulatory bodies need to be opened up. There's just too much of this regulation. You know, and what happens when you have a high-end regulatory body, such as the UGC, and they work hard, don't get me wrong. I'm not running them down. But I wish they would step back a little and look at things and see where we're headed. So if the UGC says under the national education policy, the undergraduate program, here's a model. And what happens? Every single university in India blindly adopts the model. And then there is no diversity. Everyone is just doing what the UGC has suggested, that they haven't even prescribed. They've just said these are guidelines, but no one wants to take a leap forward. But don't get pessimistic. I'm not trying to say that. There are good things that are happening, and that's what makes me, you know, sort of not just optimistic, it brings good cheer into my life. So I only wish the UGC would step back a little, but in spite of that, if our universities were to do the following, then things would work out. And I'll tell you what they need to do. One, because the policy gives you the freedom, redefine your curriculum, not the syllabus, around the needs and challenges of society and of the nation. Make it transdisciplinary. Make sure that all your pedagogy is driven by collaborative projects, problem-solving mode. Now the world is turning around to this. India had mastered this thousands of years ago, and I have historical proof for that. We seem to have lost ourselves. But this projects, problem-solving, collaborative mode brings in so many things. It ensures you get communication skills. It ensures you get data skills. It ensures you get IT skills. It ensures that you can handle problems, you can manage things, and it leads to enormous insight. You do all these things, and you will see that change will come about. And I'll give you, I'm not talking in thin air. I actually have experimented with this at the University of Delhi. And I hate talking like, you know, we knew the way, but we experimented and we found this. So we brought about changes. Under the 4-year undergraduate program, we had something called Design Your Degree. And you could find your way. What is education all about? It's all about a search of the self. You have to delve within. Each one of us carries a drumbeat. And if you discover that drumbeat, and if you march in the real world in harmony with that drumbeat, antardhvani, I call it the antardhvani. You discover that, and then you march in step with that drumbeat, you will begin to get educated. It's a lifelong process. Only a handful of people would be called truly educated, the Buddha or people like that. Otherwise, it's a lifelong process. But you have to keep marching in step with the drumbeat. And here are some simple examples. Gandhi discovered his drumbeat, which was adhere to the truth no matter what happens. And at a very young age. And who will say he was not educated? By the way, Gandhi did not have a university degree. A lot of people have this misconception, and I know there was a controversy. I've been writing about it, I've been talking about it for more than 20 years. He didn't have a law degree from a university. He qualified to practice law. But he was, who would say Gandhi was not educated? He was everybody's guru. He was father of the nation. The point is that these things that are defined as education are not connected to a degree or a formal system. But for ordinary folks like us, institutions are useful. What must they do? They must have lots of drum beats in play, so that when a young person enters the institution, he gets acquainted with those drum beats till one of them resonates with what's inside. You see, it's a kind of reflective knock. You knock there, the drum beat resonates with something inside, there's harmony, and you decide this is what I need to do. And once you do that, then the institution must give you a platform to carry that forward. And that's what we did with the 4-year undergraduate program, like the Design Your Degree. And believe you me, we had put knowledge into action. We had given hands-on activities, project-based. Do you know that our institutions now, and the national education policy, I keep harping about it because sometimes I feel you cannot talk enough about it. It repeatedly says, get out of the classroom, connect to the world. The blackboard must recede, the textbook must recede. You must connect to issues in the world and let knowledge be put into action. It says that repeatedly. This business of action. Pick up any person you admire. They were so good with their hands. If you look at Einstein, he created this marvelous theory, general relativity. But how many of us know that he was extraordinarily skilled as a craftsman? He invented the world's first automatic camera. He invented the world's first modern safe refrigerator. He held more than 50 patents and inventions for these things. Newton, one of the most gifted of craftspersons, he devised the first reflecting telescope, which is what the Hubble telescope and the other ones that are in space are. These are Newton's. He did that with his hands. He invented toys. He used things to make inventions that then allowed him to understand light. Once he got his ideas on light with his own hands, that's what led him to gravitation. People don't even realize that. Look at Kabir. He was a skilled craftsperson. He was a weaver. You know, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, he was apprenticed as a carpenter. Paigambar Sahab, Hazrat Paigambar, was a shepherd. Mahatma Gandhi was forever churning the charkha. Catch any of our students putting any of these things into action. It's all sitting in the classroom, imbibing what's on the blackboard, and then finally, forgive me, sometimes I feel I talk too much, but you've given me a platform. Look what happens. You give a lecture, you write on the board, and I've done this, I've seen students complain about this, and Rangan is here, and I admire Rangan very much, and I think he's brought about great changes. But you know, many years ago, Rangan, I was part of your institution, and I quit in 6 months. Because the students told me that they had no time to absorb, learn, or grow. All they did was memorize week after week to spit out for test after test. And our systems of assessment are drowning us. You need to do anything, you have to take a test. Sometimes I feel that if Chandrayaan takes a picture of India from outer space, it's going to look like one big exam center. Believe me, no matter what you want to do, you have to sit for an exam. And what do we do with exams? We just fail people. Our exams are devised to disable. You know, teachers set exams to make sure. And Rangan, I respect and admire you. Please believe me. I say this sincerely. I'm not trying to flatter you. You're much younger than me, and I don't need to do that. But one time, I was involved indirectly with this entrance exam for the IITs. And what was the spirit that was going on, Rangan? Let's set a question that no wretched person could answer. There was nothing like testing creativity. There was nothing like testing originality. And with all our systems, that IITs, I'm not singling out IITs, the University of Delhi has been pretty wretched in that context, believe me. But I see change in the air. People like you, others are bringing about marvelous changes. And I can see the national education policy is forever prescribing that get rid of this assessment mode that we have. And we tried this at the University of Delhi. Incidentally, after we put this in place for 1 year, we ran it successfully. Very few people know that in my 4th year as Vice Chancellor, the University of Delhi was almost at 200 in the international rankings. Almost at 200. Had we managed to continue for a couple of more years with those ideas, we would have gotten close to 100.
You know, you've raised a point that I think most people and students particularly will relate to, because if I were to speak to anyone of my generation of why they moved abroad, this was the trigger. They do terribly in their exams, move abroad, move to the United States, study there, and then excel because, you know, they had the space to be creative, their talent could really speak. But considering that for so long we've been marks-oriented, sir, considering for so long this has been the format in which we've been judged, now with the national education policy coming in, you're seeing finally talk of skill, etc. That change is starting. But do you think students are ready for it? Because they too are very mark-oriented.
Absolutely. Students, look, I am now part of a major experiment in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. The whole territory is gearing up to bring about major changes. I've been talking to students in huge numbers. And I spoke to students at Delhi University in thousands. They loved it. We have written feedback, thousands and thousands. I think I have feedback from more than 8,000 students who had undergone these processes. And all of them said that it really enabled them. They were able to grow. Because there was so much happening in terms of knowledge connected to society. By the way, when I demitted office, we had undergraduates who had 1 year into college had set up startups which flowered into startups at the Silicon Valley and at Bangalore, multi-million-dollar startups. And we had electronic startups by undergraduates. When I demitted office, all through our undergraduate programs, they had flowered into more than 50 crores worth of value when I demitted. I don't know where they are now. I haven't heard about them. I heard that after I demitted office, somewhere things had lost balance, but I'm an optimist, and I think the policy will allow us to do things. Finally, the last thing, and then you can ask or you can send me off, I don't care. Finally, one of the biggest problems that India has had, it has not paid attention to undergraduate teaching. We relegate it to the backwaters. All major, you know, JNU doesn't even have an undergraduate program. At Harvard, I was told this by one of the greatest living mathematicians, that the senior-most mathematicians fight with each other to teach the first-year undergraduates. Do you know that at Imperial College, where I was a student, there is the equivalent of a Nobel Prize in maths called the Fields Medal. The Fields medalists used to take tutorials, not even teach, tutorials for first-year undergraduates. Look at Delhi University. All our undergraduate teaching is relegated to our colleges, which is always the mixed bag because the process of appointing, and I'm not running down college teachers, I've been one myself, but the process of selecting a college teacher, the standards are abysmal, abysmal. Take my word for it, and they haven't changed over years. Compare that to the way a university teacher is appointed, one who teaches at the postgraduate program. He has to go through a much stronger, stricter process. What are we doing? We have relegated everything to undergraduates in the backwaters. Hardly any research happens, hardly any entrepreneurship happens, hardly any startups happen. Again, the policy tells us that let the teachers recede a little into the background. Let the curriculum and the pedagogy connect you to the world. And undergraduates, particularly in these times, we have huge numbers of undergraduates. Forget all those who go abroad. India would be a poor country if a few lakh go abroad each year and then we say we are lost. No, we are full of talent. And all these who stay back, and most of them come from the lower economic segments of society or from rural areas. They are idealistic and they are full of talent, and those are the ones we harnessed. Gave them the pedagogy, connected to the real world, and they started writing research papers just 1 year into college. And those were hard research papers. They're not just for the heck of it. I remember this first year undergraduate, India is woefully inadequate in the area of cybersecurity and encryption. And this first year undergraduate, running through our 4-year program, at the end of his 2 semesters, wrote this marvelous research paper with a new idea on encryption that got published in a very good journal. Why? Because he was working on a project where he was asked to use IT and some of the ideas from number theory to see what he could do, and he came up with this marvelous insight. You know, every email you send, everything you use on WhatsApp, everything that we encrypt in all our electronic devices, the first step for encryption, and Rangan will bear me out, uses an algorithm called the RSA algorithm, named after 3 mathematicians, Rivesh, Shamir, Alderman. They are multimillionaires. They hold the patent on this, and they invented it in the 70s. I have gotten school children to design a little more efficient algorithms using the same ideas from number theory with good coding. Catch any school curriculum in India that will give them credit for what they did. That inventiveness, that originality, that create, and they worked in a group. It wasn't that one person came forward. They worked in a group, and they worked for 6 months. And these were 11th and 12th grade students, boys and girls together. And they did it. They showed the whole thing. It worked so well, and it was not easy to decode. Now just imagine if they had continued this journey, if we had given them the platform, they would have done so much. And that's what happened at the university. But now, let me just tell you that we used to hire a whole train from the Indian Railways, convert it into a college, known as the College on Wheels, Gyanoday Express. 1,000 students would ride year in, year out, 5 years in my time. You would be selected if you came with a project connected to the journey, any part of the journey, hands-on, transdisciplinary, connected to some aspect of the journey, and if it is worth it, we put you into the train. The whole train, we had one room as a library, one whole coach as a lecture room, and they worked on projects. Some of them worked on the design of toilets, some worked on how to serve food, some worked on the culture of the land they visited, some on the geography, some on the entrepreneurship. And my God, the kind of results we had here. Did you know finally, students from Michigan University, one of the best in the world, Edinburgh University ranked 13th in the world, King's College ranked 45th in the world. They would participate in our journeys to take credit for their own degrees back home. We had students coming in from abroad. Had these things been allowed to flower, India would have shot way out into outer space. But let me tell you, so at this point in time, I am looking after higher education in Jammu and Kashmir. And we have already launched, yesterday the Academic Council of the University of Jammu has approved this Design Your Degree undergraduate program. It allows undergraduates all through a common platform using the principles of pedagogy, transdisciplinarity, connected to the real world, so on and so forth, to find their drumbeats. Some will take a kind of BTech degree in something that they like. Some will take a BA honors degree. Some will take a BCom degree, but all largely practice-oriented. And that has been India's way in the past, always. India was always knowledge. The Mimamsa school of philosophy, so ancient Indian philosophy, says categorically, knowledge without action is meaningless. I marvel that the minister understands, and I'm glad he's also looking after skills. Do you know we teach a subject called fluid dynamics in every university, every IIT in India. They teach it on the board. I have asked student after student, how do you put this to use? And they have no clue. It is critical in the design of aircraft. Why do you think we are unable to make planes? We always import planes. Because our knowledge on fluid dynamics has no practical application. It's textbook driven, taught on the board, and then one wretched exam at the end of the semester, and you're done. But the kid doesn't know what to do with it. Then he goes and sells soap. That's the way we are. That's what we need to change. Jammu is changing, Kashmir is changing. Once this degree was designed, all vice chancellors of the entire union territory of Jammu and Kashmir are in concurrence that they will, so a train will run over there each year, the budget is in place, students will ride from the entire union territory, go into different parts of India. They're going to have innovation projects where they will gain credit for what they do, hands-on, transdisciplinary, again, connected to the real world, data, communication, IT, all these will be enhanced. And all of them are in unison and have accepted this program. So to my mind, Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir is probably going to be the first state of India where the national education policy, if God wills it, will begin to show results.
That's amazing, truly amazing. Dr. Dinesh Singh, you know, when we talk about all of these challenges really and how India hasn't reached up to its potential, what you say is that we were there earlier and then we went back to being Marx oriented.
We were absolutely there.
So what went wrong? Why is it that, you know, other universities have gone back to what India taught?
Arun, you'll have to call me again, okay? Okay, so let me tell you what I understand, and I don't want to convey this impression that I have the last word and knowledge on this. I hardly have much wisdom, as any married man knows, you know, you don't. But I'd certainly like to experiment, and I'll tell you something. See, if you look at the Upanishads, these are historical recordings of the great gurus, the Upanishads. And my favorite Upanishad is the Chandogya Upanishad. And in the Chandogya Upanishad, there is this marvelous episode, this historical tale, which I repeat all the time. It's at least 1,000 years before the time of Christ. 1,000 years before, at least, maybe much older. What does it say? There is this great guru, Gautam Haridrumat. To his Gurukul comes this 12-year-old boy. The first lesson, our institutions of learning would not admit a child till he was 12. Till then, he was homeschooled. And in Bengal, the practice continued till the 18th century. I have historical records to show that. Then he would go to a Gurukul. Right now, we start competing for admissions at the second, when the child is 2 years age. Incidentally, I don't know what it is like now. I think there are many reforms in place. But when my children had to go to school, Arun, I couldn't send them to your school because that was a little further from where I lived. But the schools that I went with my daughter all said they would interview her. And she said, I will never be interviewed. So that was the end of the matter. But let me tell you something. Ramanujan and Einstein could not speak till they had crossed 5 years of age. These processes that our enlightened schools were following, your school wasn't doing that, were following, would have eliminated all Ramanujans and Einsteins. Just think about it. That's what we were doing. But Haridrumat asks this boy, child, what is your lineage? We admit only Brahmins. This worries you when you first read the first few lines. And the boy says, you know, I asked this question of my mother when I set forth for your Gurukul. And my mother said, son, I have worked as a maid in many homes. Many men have taken advantage of me. I have no idea who your father is. But you proclaim yourself loudly, my name is Jabala, that you are Satyakam, son of the maid Jabala. Then what does Haridrumat say? That and only that is the hallmark of a Brahman. A Brahman is not by birth. A Brahman is by adherence to the truth. Look at the liberal view. That's the liberal approach India has always had. You know, one of the first stanzas of the Rig Veda says, Ano Bhadra Kritabo Yantu Vishwata. Let noble thoughts come to us from every direction. Education is all about that. Then what does Haridrumat do? He doesn't tell Satyakam, go recite the Vedas. Do you know what he does? He gives him 300 odd head of cattle. Says, go to the forest and do not return until they become 1,000 in number. Do you know all wealth in those days was measured in terms of how many head of cattle you own? This was a project in wealth management. Catch any management institution thinking of this as a project in wealth management. And when Satyakam returns, after they have become 100 odd, 1,000 odd in number, Haridrumat says, I see enlightenment on your face, son. Who taught you? And then he says that in the process of shepherding the cattle, in the process of taking care of them and himself, in the forest, there are so many things that he had to learn, practice-based, connected to the needs and challenges of society, looking after cattle, that he becomes enlightened. There is no Rig Veda there. There's nothing to be recited, nothing to be memorized, no tests. The test is that they have to, the result. And you know, the process of trying to get the result is the real test, not that you have to have 1,000. That was it. But that's not the only instance. You know, people make fun of things. I learned at Columbia University and at Johns Hopkins. These are two premier institutions of medicine. Learned from historians of medicine that India was the first country in the world much before the time of Christ, to invent both plastic surgery and cataract surgery. And do you know something? Our metallurgy was so advanced, this is hundreds of years before the time of Christ, that we could devise fine instruments for surgery. And I have seen the descriptions at Johns Hopkins University of Ayurvedic instruments. And they used to be exported. How could you make those instruments? Because India had invented wood steel. No country in the world could invent that. This is chemistry, metallurgy in action, molding instruments. When Alexander comes to, and this was being exported, and Pliny records, the Roman historian, that goods from India are taking away our gold. That's why we were a knowledge economy, and we were taking our wealth by exporting these things. And it isn't just about that. Our knowledge systems invented a device called the Rappelgai. That's a mathematical device coming from our institutions of learning. What is it used for? To navigate. It's a mathematical device. And Indian ships would travel the oceans accurately navigating because they knew how to find position at sea. When Newton, unaware that India has done this, is asked by Britain to find a way to navigate, he says in Parliament that as of now, science knows no means of determining position at sea, whereas India was doing it from since before the time of the Christ. I'll tell you why. I have historical evidence. So this is not, and I'll give you two, and I'm going to stay quiet after that. One, my wife told me don't speak too much, okay? So
no, you're more than welcome to, so we're enjoying this.
Actually, my mother-in-law lives right below me, you see. So I have to be a little careful about that. Anyway, so there is a tiny island of Madagascar on the way to Africa. It's called Socotra. Actually, it had a Sanskrit name, Sukhadra Dweep. This island has lots of caves. On the walls of the caves are scrawlings by Indian sailors from the time of Jesus Christ in Brahmi and Pali. What are those scrawlings? They write their stories that they have traveled from India, crossed the Indian Ocean, landed at Socotra, Sukhadra Dweep, to replenish their supplies and move on to Africa and then beyond. And how could they find their place? European ships, many hundreds of years later, also could not find their place until they invented the chronometer. How did we do that? Because they were using the Rappelgai, a mathematical device coming from knowledge systems in India, knowledge in action. And Vasco da Gama, when he comes to India, and I read in my history books, Arun, maybe they still write it, that he discovered the sea route to India. Hundreds of years since before his time we were doing it, and what did he do? He picked up Kana, a navigator from Gujarat in Africa, Mozambique. And Kana took him straight from there, crossed the Indian Ocean and brought him to Kerala, straight. And Vasco da Gama saw that he was using the Rappelgai, carried it back with him, but he couldn't figure it out. And I have evidence. Who told me this first? A Harvard historian. Nobody from India. I don't know if they still know it. Then I checked with a distinguished Portuguese historian. She also said, absolutely. She says, we teach that. He just used Kana. And that is knowledge into action. And therefore, our ships could travel the seas with accuracy, trade, and bring back wealth. And that was helping our economy. That is what the national education policy allows us to do. I'm happy that Rangan is going to set up a campus. I had sent a delegation in my second year as Vice Chancellor to Africa to set up a campus, and I was going to set up a campus at Washington, D.C. But, my father used to say, never plan too much. Maybe I planned too much, and then things began to fall apart, not necessarily because of me, but whatever. And this isn't the only thing. When Alexander was returning from India, do you know why he returned? Again, our history books don't tell us this. He did not cross the Beas River. Because when he reached the Beas, his spies went across. And then they came back and told him that there is a huge army, the Magadhan army, arrayed across the river. Thousands of elephants, thousands of cavalry, and thousands of foot soldiers, undefeated and eager to give you battle. And that's why he returned, and he was a demoralized man. And history records that on his way back, his friend Porus had become a friend by then, he gifted him ingots of the Woods steel that India had mastered. And that cheered up Alexander, because that's what was used to make the famous Damascene talwar, the Damascus sword. That was the Woods steel from India. Faraday in the 18th century tries to recreate the Woods steel and he fails. Because only we have lost the art also. But that was fetching us a lot of gold. The Damascus sword owes its reputation to the steel that came from India. That was used also for a surgical. I'm done.
Yes, Mr. Puri, can we get a mic to him, please? To Mr. Puri? You know, I'm just going to hand over my mic to you.
Yeah, good question, Arun. So I should have said that. So, you know, Angus Maddison, this distinguished historian, economic historian, Angus Maddison, in his monumental work, based on hard data from the 1st century till the beginnings of the 18th century, records through hard data that India dominated global economy. We had the highest GDP, China came second. Why? Because we were a knowledge economy. Why did things start going wrong? Unfortunately, two things happened. We lost many of our institutions due to all those raids that took place. The libraries of Nalanda, Takshashila, Vallabhi, all of them were destroyed. Even then, and by the way, Vallabhi used to admit women students. Just think about it. You know, Robert Gohin had to fight to admit ladies to Princeton in the 60s. And Vallabhi, centuries before, was admitting women students. We were pretty enlightened. And India dominated global GDP. There is hard data. No one questions Madison's work. Now the thing is, when the British took over, you know, we began to lose faith in ourselves. And I've seen this. You know, there is a district in Tamil Nadu called Chengalpattu. I've looked at hard data for Chengalpattu. Before the British come, and you know, they had trouble with water even in those days, but they had this marvelous system of storing and using water through a system of eries, so that they would never have a drought. And Chengalpattu's rice production, its skills production was unmatched. And then you see immediately after the British takeover, you see a decline. The record, the data shows. See, they began to destroy our self-confidence and our institutions of education to a large extent. And that demoralized us. And then we had to then jump to the Western bandwagon. And I personally benefited from the Western system, but there are things that we had in our system, this collaborative project-based learning and solving problems. Now, both in America and UK, the Tony Blair Foundation has just come up with a report that that is the pedagogy all institutions must adopt. And that's what we lost. And that's where we sort of started losing our momentum. But you know, I must also tell you something, one last episode. Amarnath Jha was the Vice Chancellor of Allahabad University before independence and a little after. And when Meghnad Saha resigned and went away from Allahabad, Allahabad was known as the Oxford of the East. And Amarnath Jha was there for 16 years and he made it what it became. And then Amarnath Jha thought that I need to replace him with someone not less than him. And guess who he appointed? He didn't ask the British. They didn't even stop him. He appointed Schrödinger the Nobel laureate, and Schrödinger accepted. Just when Schrödinger was to set forth for India, the war broke out. And so he could not come. That's the kind of freedom he had. Now, the UGC will not allow me to even appoint Ramanujan when he comes, because they will say he doesn't have net, he doesn't have this, he doesn't have that. That is the...
Dr. Dinesh Singh, huge round of applause for you, sir. It was so insightful. I wish I could have taken notes through that session. But I have a lot more questions that hopefully I'll get to ask you the next time around at the India Today Education Conclave, where I promise we will have more time and there's no times up flashing at us. But thank you so much, Dr. Dinesh Singh. Can I invite Mr. Raj Chengalpattu to please come up and hand over a token of appreciation, please. A big round of applause. Dr. Dinesh Singh, who spoke his heart out. I asked for 3 reasons. He gave me 3 solutions as well. Thank you, sir.